Good morning, good Friday to you as we continue our daily devotions. We've been going through the book A View from the Zoo by Gary Richmond, and hopefully you've been really enjoying it. Make sure you let us know if you'd like us to keep doing daily devotions. But today's devotion is called What's It to You? And we got a picture that goes along with this one of an orangutan, and let's get started. There was no doubt in my mind that my wife Carol was interested when I confessed that I was finding myself attracted to a 24-year-old redhead named Sally. I shared that Sally was short, had beautiful brown eyes, was extremely affectionate, and was absolutely brilliant. I told her how Sally's auburn hair trailed gently down her back, arms, legs, and feet, and she even had some on her head. Carol was entertained when I admitted that Sally was an orangutan. Sally was under my care at the zoo's health center while her assigned mate, Eli, was being treated for tuberculosis in an adjacent cage. Sally and Eli were as different as day and night. Sally was a butterball, sweet, hopeful, gentle, and smart as a whip. Eli, he was grouchy, calculating, meaner than sin, and stronger than an ox. Let me tell you some stories that will help you to know them better. Now, Sally was my favorite animal and still is, so I will begin with her. Any keeper worth their salt will offer their great apes something to do. In the wild, these animals spend their time looking for food and shelter. Since those things are provided in a zoo, there is nothing for these intelligent and sensitive apes to do but watch an endless stream of people watching them. If you could imagine watching a movie which had no change of scenery, an unchanging cast, or an ever-changing cast and no plot, then you could conceive what a great ape's existence might be like without a creative keeper. Lack of occupation leads to abnormal and aggressive behavior. I love to give Sally things to do because she always participated so enthusiastically. Problem solving was her forte, so I gave her lots to solve. I would line up 20 peanuts exactly 3 feet out from the bars of her cage and give her a bath towel. And then Sally would fish for the peanuts by repeatedly casting the towel over them. Little by little, she would drag them one at a time to the cage and place them in a neat little pile. She was so decent and orderly that I'm sure she was a Presbyterian. I'll never forget the day of Sally's great discovery. I set up the peanuts in a normal fashion, handed her a white bath towel. She carefully unfolded it and draped it over a considerable lap, studying it thoughtfully. And then she gave me that eureka look. She got up quickly and scooted to her drinker, dragging the towel behind her. She looked back at me, and her expression told me she was onto something big. She dipped the towel in and out of the drinker several times until she was satisfied that it was thoroughly soaked. Then she wrung out the excess water. She ambled over to where I had placed the 20 peanuts and cast her wet towel over 5 of them. She retrieved them with just one effort. I was astounded. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure that I would have reasoned that a wet towel would have increased my advantage. But Sally did. Sally viewed food as her great necessity. And you know what they say, necessity is the mother of invention. Sally's love for food bordered on lust, and she developed whole routines to gain our empathy and attention. She would begin with lip smacking and graduate to body slapping. And when we looked at her, she would smile a gargantuan smile and point at her mouth. If nothing else worked, she would croak forth with grunts and barks, sounds that clearly displayed her frustration. One day she took a more direct approach. I was passing by her cage to deliver a bunch of grapes to some primates at the back of the health center. Suddenly, Sally's mighty hand shot through the bars and grasped my arm with an iron grip. She gently but firmly pulled me close to the bars and pointed to the grapes. She smiled. There was no doubt in my mind that she wanted the grapes, and I found that a perfectly convenient time to let her have them. She took them in the most ladylike manner and delicately laid them on her sleeping bench, keeping my arm firmly in her grasp. She reached out for the hand which had held the grapes, drew it closely to her mouth, and kissed it. Then she patted me on the back as if to say, "Keep up the good work." Sally was also helpful. She delighted in scraping up her leftover food into a neat pile and dropping it just outside her cage. On one morning, I filled a bucket with warm, soapy water and set it right next to her cage. I showed her how to clean the bars of her cage using a bath towel and then gave her the bath towel. She worked diligently for 40 minutes, scrubbing, rinsing, and wringing. She cleaned all the bars, her sleeping bench, and her holding cage. That little effort won her a vanilla malt. When Sally was finally allowed to be caged with Eli, she became a prolific breeder. She is the mother of at least 7 offspring, but her first birth was the most dramatic. Her baby, Jonathan, was born still encased in the placental sac. She had no idea that she needed to remove it, and we all watched in terror as she sat doing nothing while her newborn was dying from a lack of oxygen. Finally, Dr. Sedgwick rushed in at some personal risk and took the baby. Nearly 5 minutes had passed before he tore the tiny orangutan from its birthing sac. The baby was cool, still, and hadn't taken a breath. He began CPR and stimulated the body with deliberate massage. Still, no breathing or heartbeat. Dale Thompson, the keeper who was assisting Dr. Sedgwick, asked, "What do we do now?" The heroic vet looked up long enough to say, "We don't give up! We never give up!" He injected a heart stimulant and the baby stiffened in response. All present cheered and then held their breath to see what would come of the doctor's last chance to retrieve the baby's ebbing life. The heartbeat was weak at first, and then it began to increase in volume and regularity. Jonathan would live. He will always be a little slow because of the severe oxygen deficit he suffered at birth. But he is alive and well and is bringing a great deal of pleasure to thousands of zoo visitors. Sally is really something. Visitors of Los Angeles Zoo still watch her perform her hilarious food routines. She had added a new gesture that I had never noticed while she was under my care. She uses her hand to shade her eyes from the glare of the sun. Eli was nothing like Sally. He spent every waking moment looking for opportunities to pull keepers through the bars of his cage. We had to be watchful while walking near his cage because he had the kind of strength necessary to tear a man's arm off. A San Francisco zookeeper lost his arm to a large male orangutan during a careless moment. I once saw Eli perform a feat of strength that made me a believer. Eli's cage was positioned next to a garage door that was opened every morning to ventilate the health center. When the door was opened, the spring was extended precariously close to Eli's cage. Eli was just able to twang the spring with his longest massive finger. No matter where I worked in the health center, I could hear the monotonous twang as he plucked at it with regularity. In the back of my mind, I knew that someday he would grasp the spring with his whole hand. I did not think that I would actually see it happen, but I did. Eli was in late adolescence and was growing rapidly toward adulthood. I was heading back to the orangutans area after checking on the other animals under my care in the center. When I rounded the corner, I stopped in amazement. Eli had a full grasp of the spring and was pulling it into his cage. He resembled a giant hairy Robin Hood, pulling a long bow to its limit. The whole garage door assembly bent toward the cage, and then he grabbed that. He pulled with all his might and ended up pulling bolts through a cracking and splintering 4x4. By the time we were able to remove the assembly, he had tied the metal spring into several knots. After I witnessed that incident, I added a foot or two onto the already respectful distance that I walked from his cage, and there were more incidents to follow. Eli delighted in breaking things. One day he managed to stuff his whole body underneath his sleeping bench. The sleeping bench was welded securely to the bars of the cage, about 18 inches off the floor. Eli flexed every muscle in his powerful body. The 2-inch by 6-inch boards that were bolted to the sleeping bench cracked, and then shattered all over the floor of his cage. Eli chose the largest board and fashioned it into a lever. He jammed the lever between the chain that secured the door and the bars of his cage. He pulled with all of his strength, but succeeded only in breaking the lever. We were glad. The most frightening incident occurred at feeding time at the health center. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the vet and I were finishing our lunch. A blood-curdling, bone-chilling scream exploded the afternoon stillness, and we looked at each other, both knowing what was happening. Ken, the keeper in the cage room, was in Eli's grasp. If we didn't get there quick, Ken's chances of survival were slim to none. We leaped out of our chairs and headed for the cage room with reckless abandon. I veered off to grab the capture gun, and that always intimidated Eli. He wouldn't know if it were loaded or not. The doctor unlocked the cage room door, and we burst through the opening together. Ken was screaming at the top of his lungs, and we were hoping that we were not too late to save a hand or a finger. As we rounded the corner, we saw that other help had arrived before us. Ken's senior keeper was poised to swing a shovel at Eli's hand. Ken had managed to turn his arm so that Eli could not pull it through the bars. Eli was trying his best to turn his arm while the senior keeper was trying to get a line on hitting Eli's hand with the shovel. The senior took a powerful swing. This was no time to hold back. Eli was mean, but he wasn't stupid. He removed his hand at the last possible second. The shovel connected with Ken's arm, causing him much more injury than Eli had. Ken rolled backwards a safe distance from the cage, looked up at the senior keeper, smiled a relieved smile, and said, "Whose side are you on anyway?" "Eli wouldn't let you like him. Because of his meanness, I gave him satisfactory but not exceptional care." There were many times that Sally procured treats that I denied Eli. I didn't mind cleaning up after Sally when I had given her a magazine to look at, but I did Eli. The bottom line was Sally was easy to love, but Eli wasn't. I really had to force myself to be nice to him. As time passed, I learned the difference between the good keepers and the great. The great simply gave their best to all the animals, whether their animals performed or not. I'm sure that this is what God expects from Christians. Jesus shares a verse that haunts me when I try to apply it to my life. It may be found in Luke 6:27 through 36. See how it affects you. "But I say to you that hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To him who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And to him who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and of him who takes away your goods, do not ask them again. And as you wish that man would do to you, do as you do so to them. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those that love them, and if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, and do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and selfish. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful." Think it over. And that ends our week. And thanks for joining us. Please leave a comment down below, maybe about what this meant to you, and maybe about how God's challenging you to love everybody, regardless if they're friend or enemy. And we'll see you next week.